This is a podcast by the Norfolk Record Office for Refugee Week. There are 11 stops on the walk. At the end of each stop, there will be directions to the next stop. Please pause the podcast after these directions and restart once you have reached the next stop. 1. Norwich Cathedral Cloister. Stand in the southwest corner of the cloister by the door leading up some steps to the new refectory. Look up at the carved stone bosses. Can you see the face of a man peeping through the leaves? This is known as a green man. We know who carved this face in the stone. It was a man named Bryce, and in 1416 he was paid 4 shillings and 8 pence, about 23 pence in today's money, for his work. It took him 2 weeks to carve, so he was not paid very much. But of course, you could buy a great deal more than you can today in that sum of money. One other thing we know about Bryce is that he was not English. He was a Dutchman. Was he a refugee? The documents do not tell us, but we know that there are very many refugees from the Netherlands in Norfolk and Norwich at this time, almost 600 years ago. Some were economic refugees and others fleeing from persecution. It was a time of great upheavals in their own country, some natural and some man-made. In 1420s Holland alone, there were terrible floods in 1421 and 1422. There was a civil war in 1425 and a peasants' revolt in North Holland in 1426. These disasters caused devastation to towns and villages, and many refugees made the short trip across the sea to Great Yarmouth, and from there upriver to Norwich. They included tailors, smiths, glassmakers, and even an organ maker. They also included 2 hat makers, apparently bringing a new trade into Norwich. We know the names of many of these people because of the actions of the British government. They registered them by entering their names on the patent rolls, and they were also made to swear an oath of allegiance to the English crown. Walk into the close and up the hill. Notice the semicircular gables on the house to your left. These are Dutch gables, a shape brought into Norfolk by Dutch immigrants many centuries ago. We shall see other things brought to Norfolk by Dutch settlers later. They are now so much part of the Norfolk scene, like these gables, that often we do not think that we owe their existence to immigrants to the city. Leave the close by the gates. Continue across the main road at the traffic lights and walk onto Queen Street. Stop on the right at a doorway between the 2 estate agents. Pause the recording while you walk and press the play button when you arrive.
2. The French Church. Look at the 2 red plaques on the church wall. They tell us that this building was used by the Walloons or French-speaking church for almost 200 years, from 1637 to 1832. 2 groups of people, French speakers and Dutch speakers, fled from what is now Holland and Belgium in the 1560s and 1570s to escape from religious persecution in their homeland by the Spanish authorities. These countries were then part of the Spanish Empire. At one time, almost 1 person in 3 in Norwich belonged to one of these groups. There were over 90 children baptised here in the French church in 1 year alone, 1600. A fascinating archive used to exist in the town of Ypres, of letters written by the refugee strangers at Norwich back to their families and friends in that town. In one letter, Klaes van Wervekin wrote to his wife, "You would never believe how friendly the people are together, and the English are the same, and quite loving to our nation." Inevitably some customs were different, so that he asked her to bring with her a dough trough, for there are none in England, and also to bring some dishes in which to make butter. For, he wrote, all the Netherlanders and Flemings here make their own butter, for here it is all pig fats. This is an early example of a refugee finding the diet of his new home not entirely as he would wish. In another letter, a young man, Gilles Navagier, wrote to his grandmother back in Ypres, saying that he and his family are living in great quietness and peace. The family had been able to find jobs of various kinds. His brother was learning the trade of a cutler, 1 sister worked in a brewery, another younger one was spinning thread, while the 3rd sister, Sinkin, presumably just a baby, played all day. Such letters between refugees and their families should be carefully preserved. They make up an important record for future generations. Continue up Queen Street. At the top, turn sharp right and go into the churchyard. Pause the recording while you walk and press the play button when you arrive.
3. The Churchyard of St Michael at Plea. This is a good place to think about the Dutch refugees of 400 years ago. The central authorities welcomed them to England and made sure that the local authorities were equally welcoming. The Queen's Council wrote to the city asking them to continue their favour.
To the poor men of a Dutch nation who, fleeing the persecution lately begun in their country for the true religion, have fled into this realm for succour, and be now placed in the city of Norwich, and have hitherto been favourably and gently ordered, which a Queen's Majesty, as a merciful and religious prince, doth take in very good part, praying you to continue your favour unto them, so long as they shall live amongst you, quietly and obediently to God's true religion and to her Majesty's laws. For so one Christian man in charity is bound to help another, especially them who do suffer affliction for the gospel's sake.
If the church is open, go in. On the corner of a wall just behind the font is the memorial stone of another Dutch family, the De Haims. Jacques De Haim died in 1603. The writing is very faded now, but the pictures are clearer. You can see the whole family kneeling at prayer, and also some symbols representing death, the skull, the crossbones, and the hourglass. If you look at the white building across the road, you will see a plaque to Francis Burgess, who started the Norwich Post here in 1701. He was a printer, and this was the first newspaper ever produced in England outside London. However, he was not the first printer in Norwich. There had been several among the Dutch refugees who came to Norwich in the 1560s and 1570s. The most well known was Anthony de Salem, and some of the books he printed are in Norwich Library. Almost all of them are in Dutch, showing that there were plenty of Dutch people in the city, refugees and others, who were capable of reading and who wanted books in their own language. He didn't just print books, however. He was also licensed to sell wine in the city. Go down St Andrew's Hill and to the large church on your right. Go to the right-hand doorway, where there is a large blue plaque. The entrance leads to the Blackfriars Church on the right inside. There are steps, but there is a lift. Pause the recording while you walk and press the play button when you arrive.
4. The Dutch Church. You are now inside the church used for more than 300 years by the Dutch community in Norwich. Some of these Dutch were refugees fleeing from persecution in their homeland. One of these was Janus Crowther, born at Antwerp in 1560, whose family fled to Norwich when he was just a small boy. Later he went on to Cambridge University and on to become one of the greatest literary figures in the Europe of his day. His mother wrote a letter back to a friend describing their flight. This is now in Heidelberg University. Part of it reads, in translation,
Our first misfortune was our flight from the country with the Prince, then to England. First at London, when we journeyed 90 miles with 4 children for 2 months by land on a wagon, and came to a town called Norwich, where there were about 1,200 Flemings, and among them all, not one person whom I had ever seen before. We did not know what to do to earn our living there. The trade there was the spinning of wool and preparing of baize, in which we had no skill, so we had to join together with other people and brought wool and supplied the poor people with wool and took baize in exchange and sent them to London to sell them there. There we chanced upon a merchant who, when the day for payment came and we thought to have our money, was bankrupt, and £450 was lost. That was our first welcome. The second was that the same man who was in partnership with us left England secretly to cross to Flushing with £300 sterling, and on arrival at Flushing he jumped into the water for fear of the Spaniards who came alongside, and sank with all the money and never came up again. And so we lost that too. I leave you to imagine how we felt then, but the Lord be praised for the grace that he gave my dear husband. I never saw him even sigh about it. He only said, "The Lord gave it, and he has taken it away again."
Another characteristic of a new Dutch residents of Norwich was their love of flowers. It was they who introduced the tulip to England. In the early 17th century, they were holding florists' feasts here, attended by both Dutch and English. These were the Chelsea flower festivals of their day. Cross the road and walk up St Andrew's Hill. Stop outside Trudy's on the right. Pause the recording while you walk and press the play button when you arrive.
5. St Andrew's Hill. In the second half of the 19th century, the Jews within the Russian Empire were subject to persecution, and a large number fled westwards. Many came to England. The 1901 census for this house shows such a family. Barrett Lazarus was living here with his wife Sarah. They were in their early 40s, and he worked as a tailor in his home here. Both had been born in Warsaw. They had 8 children living with them, aged between 18 years and just 3 months. Their names were Abraham, Miriam, Leah, Lewis, Jack, Wolf, Phoebe, and David Lazarus. The 6 eldest children had been born in London, and the 2 youngest in Norwich. This suggests that Barrett and Lazarus had fled from Warsaw perhaps 20 years earlier and had settled in London, where there was a very large Jewish community. Sometime between the birth of Wolf and Phoebe in the later 1890s, they had moved to Norwich. There were 2 other people staying in the house, both of whom were also born in Poland: Abel Raphael, a machinist, and Solomon Abraham, a tailor. Presumably they were fellow Jewish refugees working for Barrett in this house. Continue up the hill. As you pass the last building on the right, Yana's Festival, notice the large windows to the upper floor. These are lucums, windows introduced by the weavers to provide as much light as possible onto their looms. The Norfolk word lucum is taken directly from the French word lucarne. Have you ever wondered why open spaces in Norwich are called plains rather than squares? This is another word brought over by refugees, in this case the Dutch word plen. Turn right into London Street, follow the road round onto the marketplace, go up the hill with the Guildhall on your right, and stop on the wide pavement opposite the main entrance to City Hall. Pause the recording while you walk, and press the play button when you arrive.
6. In front of City Hall. The large church is called St Peter Mancroft. If you had been here on 30th of May 1813, you would have seen a sight almost unique for its time: 3 young black boys brought into the church for baptism in the font. These were a special form of refugee, slave children who had been taken from their parents in Africa and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean. The slave trade had been outlawed in 1807, and British Navy ships would patrol the ocean, taking control of ships full of slaves, in order to give them their freedom. The freed slaves usually went to Sierra Leone to start a new life. The fact that these 3 boys were brought back here must mean that they were too young to look after themselves, and that they had no one on board the ship to care for them. They were given the names of Paolo Luando, Edward Mackenzie, and Charles Fortunatus Freeman. We do not know what their African names had been, and we do not know what happened to them in later life. They emerged from the obscurity of the past for just one brief moment in this Norwich church almost 200 years ago. 70 years ago, there were some very different refugees here. Wars and civil wars in the 20th century have created so many. The Spanish Civil War is just one example. On May Day 1938, we would have seen Spanish child refugees here in Norwich Marketplace. In those days, the market stalls were not permanent, and the space created when they were cleared away was used for speeches and demonstrations. The Labour Party always held a rally on May Day. On this occasion, in 1938, 36 Spanish refugees, both boys and girls, who were lodged in a hostel at Wickham Market, took part. They were preceded by a Spanish Republican flag, and some wore dresses in their national colours, They sang the Internationale and songs of their own country. One of their number, a girl of 14, made a speech in Spanish, which was afterwards translated for the crowd. A collection was made and the money was handed over to the carers of these refugee children. Another group of refugee children in Norwich in the same year were those of German and Austrian Jews. Germany had taken over Austria in March 1938 and immediately began persecution of a large Jewish community there. Many left, but others chose to stay and instead sent their children to a safer place. In December 1938, no less than 520 Jewish children from Vienna arrived at Pakefield Holiday Camp, where they stayed until homes in Britain could be found for them. They had travelled by train all the way, crossing over the Hook of Holland and landing at Harwich. Go straight on with the church to your left and the forum to your right. Stop in the space just before the pedestrian crossing. Look for two buildings on the other side of the road, another church, St. Stephen's, to the left, and the assembly rooms with high railings to the right. Pause the recording while you walk and press the play button when you arrive.
7. On Millennium Plain. Many Norwich people know that the Assembly House includes rooms named after the Novaire family. For many years there was a Novaire cinema here. The Novaires were dancing masters in Norwich, holding their classes in the Assembly House, and they worshipped at St. Stephen's Church. They were one of several families of French Protestants coming to England after their form of religion ceased to be tolerated in their own country in 1685, and achieving great things in the city. Others were the Martineau and Boileau families. The Martineaus produced several well-known local figures, including the Victorian writer Harriet Martineau. The family have given their name to the road where the Norfolk Record Office is based. The Boileaus are less well known. Charles Boileau fled from France to Holland in 1685 and took refuge in England in 1701. He met his wife while he was in Holland. Their descendants came to Norfolk in the 19th century. There is a Boileau close in Tuxford. How many of its residents know that the name is that of a refugee family welcomed into England over 3 centuries ago? Retrace your steps past the Forum. Turn left down Bethel Street and turn right down the alley between the fire station and the police station. On reaching the main road, cross and stand in front of St. Giles Street car park. Pause the recording while you walk and press the play button when you arrive.
8. Outside St. Giles car park. Many people in Britain have themselves been refugees, although under a different name. During the Second World War, several million children were moved away from cities, usually with their school groups and teachers rather than their parents. These children all have stories to tell of their reception by strangers. Many were made very welcome, but a few were treated very badly. The Blitz of 1940 and the V-1 and V-2 rockets of June 1944 also led to many houses being destroyed in London and made many families there refugees. These families also found themselves strangers in a strange land, the countryside of England. In the summer of 1944 there were over 20,000 such refugees in the Norwich area. On one day in July alone, over 800 arrived at the railway station. The youngest was just 2 weeks old. All were found accommodation of some kind. The lucky ones were families or in empty houses. The less fortunate were put up in Nissen hats, sometimes without water or electricity. Anyone can find themselves a refugee if fate dictates it. The experiences of refugees and those who cared for them during the war gave rich and poor, townsfolk and countryfolk, a new understanding of how other people lived. The welcome given to these refugees can be illustrated here. Where the car park is now was for many years the Norwich Hippodrome Theatre. The Norfolk Record Office holds in its archives photographs of young evacuee children treated to pantomimes and Christmas events alongside local children here during the winter of 1939, refugee children welcomed into the community and sharing in its traditions. Turn right and walk towards the large church. Before reaching it, turn left and walk through Rigby's Court. The Immigrant Advisory Service is on the left. At the main road, stop and look across the street. Pause the recording while you walk and press the play button when you arrive.
9. opposite Aldwych House. This is Ninham's Court, named after a family of painters who lived here in the 18th and 19th centuries. The most famous of them was Henry Ninham, who was a member of the Norwich School of Art, and who painted very English pictures of Norwich, mainly of its buildings. Ninham too was from a refugee family. His ancestor had fled from a horrifying sequence of events, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. This mass murder of French Protestants began in Paris on August the 24th, 1572. Their leader, Admiral Coligny, was the first victim. His death was followed by the killing of minor leaders and of all Protestants within reach of the soldiers, and of the mob who joined in the chants to exterminate their sworn enemies. The massacre continued even after a royal order to stop, and it spread from Paris onto other sections of France. An estimated 3,000 were killed in Paris. Naturally, many surviving Protestants fled, and some, like Ninham's ancestor, came to England. Thus, this very English painter is another example of contribution made to the culture of the city through refugees. Turn right and cross the main road. Go into the churchyard. Pause the recording while you walk, and press the play button when you arrive.
10. In the churchyard of St. Giles. We are in the part of Norwich where George Borrow lived in the early 19th century. Cow Hill, beside the churchyard, leads down to the family house, and he was also briefly a trainee solicitor in an office in St. Giles. His reputation rests on his writings, especially Lavengro and Romany Rye, in which he talks of his own experiences with his friends of a traveller community, and brings their customs and their forms of speech into vivid life. He learnt their language, amongst many other tongues. In fact, he was taught 3 languages, French, Italian and Spanish, by yet another refugee, Father d'Etreville, a priest who had been forced to leave France at the time of the French Revolution, and who lived for a while at Strangers' Hall. D'Etreville was able to return to his home country after almost 40 years of exile. It was in the church of St. Giles that a former refugee, Samuel Crowther, preached on Sunday the 2nd of July 1882. Crowther was the first black bishop ever in the Church of England. His story begins like that of a boy baptised in St. Peter Mancroft, but in his case we do know what happened afterwards. His African name was Ajayi, and he was 11 years old when he was captured and enslaved in 1821. At one stage he was swapped by his owner for a horse, and when the horse proved a poor one, the swap was promptly cancelled. Eventually he was put on a slave ship to cross the Atlantic. The ship was taken by the British Navy and the slaves on board were freed. Ajayi was taken to Sierra Leone, where he was brought up in the school of a missionary teacher, who gave him the name Samuel Crowther. In later life he joined the church, and eventually he was ordained a bishop in Canterbury Cathedral. He translated the scriptures into his native Yoruba. While working in Africa, by pure chance, he came across his mother, from whom he had been snatched 25 years earlier. Walk along St. Giles, over the footbridge, across the main road, and into the forecourt of a Roman Catholic Cathedral. Pause the recording while you walk, and press the play button when you arrive.
11. The Roman Catholic Cathedral. The cathedral has been a place of welcome to immigrants and refugees from many lands, including a large number from Poland. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, those Poles who were able to escape fled westwards into France and England to continue their struggle against tyranny. Many were in the Polish Air Force, and these pilots played a vital role in the winning of the Battle of Britain, a turning point in the war against Germany. This generation of Polish men and women were doubly unfortunate. The Nazi regime was defeated only to be replaced by a Stalinist regime, equally impossible for many of them to endure. Hence a large number of Poles stayed on in Britain as welcome refugees from tyranny at home. During the war, many Polish pilots were based at Coltishall, north of Norwich, and they continued to operate from here as the Second World War turned into the Cold War. Some made the ultimate sacrifice. If you continue down the Earlham Road to the cemetery, you can see a whole group of Polish graves. They include one of a pilot just 20 years old, Ty Wojnak. If you look at the graves, you may notice that one is of a female, one of only 2 graves of Polish women Air Force personnel in Britain. This is of Eugenia Zagijuska, 21 years old. Based in London, she was staying with a friend at Coltishall over Easter 1946. Easter Monday was a holiday for them after worship on Good Friday and Easter Sunday, perhaps at this cathedral. On the Monday, 3 of the young Poles went to Lammas, and Eugenia and one of the others were drowned together in a boating accident. She is buried in Earlham Cemetery, 1,000 years from home. These refugees are also remembered in a plaque on the cathedral, on the left as you walk towards the high altar. It reads, in English and Polish, "In memory of those who died and in thanksgiving from those Poles who found hearth and home here."
As we think about the lives of people like Bryce Dutchman, Janusz Gruter and Evgenia Zagajewska, we can begin to see the contribution that has been made by refugees to Norwich over so many centuries. In the 1570s, a document was actually drawn up listing the benefits that the strangers had brought to Norwich over the previous 10 years. It is now among the National Archives. It says that the refugees had brought with them new ideas, new varieties of cloth making, that they had employed both fellow refugees and local people in their businesses, that they brought in new forms of food which benefited the poor in general, these are root crops, and above all, that they set an example in their skill and their hard work to their new neighbours, and in particular to the young people of Norwich. This was written almost 500 years ago, and the same could well be said of the refugee groups in the city today.